First of all, can everyone hear me out there? Can you all hear me? Good, because as you all know, I have a soft voice, and I'm trying to keep my voice up so that everyone can understand what it is that I'm saying. There's going to be a little bit a different sermon now that you know that I can give a sermon. You've heard 3 of them. I'm going to take a break, actually, from giving a sermon tonight, and instead, you're going to give the sermon. And by that I mean that I've done this with congregations, particularly all over the summer. In the place where I normally would give the sermon, I'm going to come down to you and ask for us to engage in a discussion. I have more than a few topics that we can talk about. But one thing that I think might be of interest, if you would like to do this, is to share your reflections about COVID, what it has meant to you in these years of this pandemic. How has your life changed for the good in some ways? What have you grown to appreciate that you hadn't thought of before? And how you have managed and how you have coped with certainly something that I've never encountered in my lifetime. And I thought it might be very nice for us to share in our reflections on that topic. How does that sound to all of you? Does it sound like something that you'd like to talk about and to reflect? And it's very open-ended. I've done things like this before, and everyone should be free to express their thoughts, express their feelings, and share any stories that they have that would enrich us as a community. How does that sound to all of you? Does that sound like something we can do? I see lots of head nodding. Good, okay. Since nobody is looking at each other but looking at me, is there any, someone said that's not a topic that I really care to talk about. Anyone who feels, of course, there's no compulsion to participate, but this will give us some time in the course of our service to think about things that we might want to talk about how things have changed for our community, how things have changed for our congregation, what this means in terms of Jewish values and Jewish ethics. Okay. Right, so we're going to begin. I'm going to ask Nancy Hill to come forward as we commence our service with the lighting of the Shabbat candles. Amen.
Blessed are you, Adonai our God, sovereign of the universe, who hallows us with his mitzvot, commanding us to kindle the lights of Shabbat. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu le'adikneh shel Shabbat.
Let us turn now to page 2 at the top of the page, the first two paragraphs, let us join in prayer. As these Shabbat candles give light to all who behold them, so may we by our lives give light to all who behold us. As their brightness reminds us of the generations of Israel who have kindled light, so may we in our own day be among those who kindle light. A meditation on the Shabbat candles. Meditation, Song Without Words by Felix Mendelssohn. Let us turn now to page 6. Let us join together, top of the page. There are days when we seek things for ourselves and measure failure by what we do not gain. On Shabbat, we seek not to acquire, but to share. There are days when we exploit nature as if it were a horn of plenty that can never be exhausted. On Shabbat, we stand in wonder before the mystery of creation. There are days when we act as if we cared nothing for the rights of others. On Shabbat, we remember that justice is our duty and a better world our goal. So we embrace Shabbat, day of rest, day of wonder, and day of peace. We continue now with the Hine Matov, how goodly and how pleasant it is that we join together and dwell together in this sanctuary. Top of page 7, Yedid Nefesh in the middle of the page. And we continue now with Lachadodi, come my beloved to greet the bride, the illuminating features of Shabbat as we accept it into our sanctuary, as we accept it into our hearts. We continue on page 8. We will chant the first 2 verses and then turn to the last verse on 9, Boi Shalom. Once again, the first 2 verses, Lachadodi. Before we continue now with the Chatzi Kaddish on page 11, just a short explanation about its placement here in the Siddur. Many people believe that the Chatzi Kaddish is an introduction to the Baruch Hu, where we stand and we praise God. But it's actually the opposite. It actually ends a portion of the service. And the reason it is a Chatzi Kaddish, a half Kaddish, not a full, is because the service that we just completed, the section of the Kabbalah, was not mandated. This was added by our sages. This was added over a long period of time into the Siddur. Why? Because the Shabbat was so special. There is a concept in our faith that's called Hidur Mitzvah. That is to beautify the mitzvah, to do more than just what is required, which is the evening service that has some Shabbat pieces to it. And so they added this additional piece to express their love and devotion to one of the cornerstones of our faith, which is Shabbat, that every human being is entitled to a day of rest, a day to cease from work and from labor, not given by human beings as a day off, but given by God. We continue now with the Chatzi Kaddish on page 11, followed by the Baruch Hu, at which time we will rise. may be seated. Our service continues now with a reading in the middle of page 13. Let us join together. This is an hour of change. Together. This is an hour of change. Within it we stand uncertain on the border of light. Shall we draw back or cross over? Where shall our hearts turn? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? This is the hour of change, and within it we stand quietly on the border of light. What lies before us? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? Baruch atah Adonai hama'ariv aravim. And we continue now with wisdom and wonder on page 14. Together? Wisdom and wonder, passion and instruction, story and symbol, all these things your Torah gives to us. And the more we devote ourselves to it, the more it grows and gives. What could be a truer token of your abiding love than this holiest of your works and the living language that gives it form? Baruch atah Adonai, Ohev Amo Yisrael. Please rise as we chant the Shema on page 15 and 16, followed by the V'ahavta on page 17. You may be seated, join the singing of the V'ahavta, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might.
בכל לבבך וכל נפשך ובכל מאודך והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבבך ושיננתם לבניך ודיברתם בשבתך בביתך ובלתך בדרך ובשובך ובקומך וקשקתם להיות ידיך והיו לטוטפות בעיניך וכתבתם המזוזות ביתך ובשעריך למען תזכרו ועשיתם בכל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתיכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם אלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
And let us join in prayer at the top of page 18, standing on the parted shores of history, the prelude to the Mi Chamocha. Together, standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands and marching together. We continue now with the Mi Chamocha, page 19. Before we continue our service, we're going to try to do something a little bit different. And that is, some of you may saw that I walked over to our wonderful technician, Andy, who makes the Zoom part of the service possible. And we have at least 16 people who have signed on. It could be couples, so it's probably more than 16. It's probably closer to somewhere around 22 or 23. So as a community, we are close to probably somewhere around 45 to 50 people who are participating in this service. So we'll get a little better at this as we go forward. But I do want to welcome the Alpermans, Mel Sternberg. Sometimes you don't get the last name of the individual, so there's a Janice, there's Robin Cardinale, Harold and Emily Fink, Shirley, Sharon, Maud, Phyllis Feibelman, Anne, and Martha. So on behalf of everyone who's here, and we have, I guess, probably close to 30 people, perhaps more, I haven't done a count. We want to welcome you and ensure that we know of your presence here as we continue our service. So welcome. We're going to continue now with the blessing of the spreading of the Sukkah of peace. Let us continue now the top of page 21. The prelude to the Haporei Sukkot Shalom Aleinu. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storm. Adonai, help us to walk with good companions, to live with hope in our hearts and eternity in our thoughts, that we may lie down in peace and rise up waiting to do your will. Baruch atah Adonai, haporei sukat shalom aleinu, ve'al kol amo Yisrael ve'al Yerushalayim.
Baruch atah Adonai, haporei sukat shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael. Ve'al Yerushalayim ve'al kol amo. Ve'al Yerushalayim shalom. Ve'al Yerushalayim ve'al kol amo. Ve'al Yerushalayim shalom. Baruch atah Adonai, haporei sukat shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael.
In this week's portion contains the 10 Commandments. And of course, one of the commandments is Zachor et Yom HaShabbat l'kadsho, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. In Deuteronomy, it says Shamor v'Zachor, Shamor, at Yom HaShabbat L'Kadsho, observe the Sabbath to keep it holy. My professor, Jacob Pedakovsky, may he rest in peace, gave a lesson on this part of the Siddur. Fundamental question is asked, why didn't, in the service, they put the reference of the Ten Commandments, the verses from the Ten Commandments, as opposed to this verse, this sort of obscure section that appears later on in the book of Exodus. This passage that we actually chant is not the one in the Ten Commandments, but it's later on. It's a repetition by Moses in the book of Exodus later on. So why is it that the Shamru is here and not the Ten Commandments? So my professor said the reason is that everybody knows the Ten Commandments. And what we wanted to do within the Siddur was to make the observance of Shabbat personal to B'nai Yisrael. One of the great gifts that we have given to humankind is the Shabbat. And so the Vishamru was included, as opposed to the Shabbat that's referenced in the Ten Commandments. And this passage appears, it's important for us to understand why this passage was included. Not simply because they wanted to teach all aspects of the Torah, that every aspect of Torah was important. But here particularly it was important. Why? Because this appears right before the mitzvah of the building of the tabernacle. They had this was given as a charge about what it meant to keep the Sabbath. And the question is asked in the Talmud, can you build a sanctuary on Shabbat? Think about it. Why can't you do sacred work? You're building a sanctuary, a house of worship. Why can't you set aside the Shabbat in order to build the sanctuary? And the answer is, that's what the Torah is emphasizing. The Vishamru is placed right before the building of the tabernacle to say that even holy and sacred work, the building of a synagogue, the building of the temple, does not override the sacredness of the Shabbat as a day of rest, as a day of holiness. The Shabbat is not just something in time, it is an ideal to which we aspire that transcends space, that in some sense transcends time. The way that we structure our time the rest of the week is different than the way that we structure Shabbat Kodesh, this Shabbat that brings us here this evening. We continue now at the top of the page, the Vishamru, page 22.
Sheshet Yamina Sada
Tefillah, beginning on page 23. And we continue now silently in silent devotion, silent meditation, beginning on page 28 and continuing through page 33. You may either, of course, stand if you wish, or of course, you may be seated, whatever is your tradition. We continue now, turning back to page 31 for the Shalom Rav. So can everybody hear me again, way back there? Okay, good. I did this, we did this particularly over the summer, and I'm using you in part as, it's not good to use the trace word, but as guinea pigs. And by that I mean, some of the stories that I hope to hear may find their way into a high holy day ceremony. That was a little trick that I used over the summer months when people would come and we would engage in a conversation. And sometimes I found the stories or the insights so profound that somehow in the stream of my consciousness of writing a sermon and then going through it with a fine-tooth comb to make sure it made sense, I would find those stories to be so moving and so compelling. So we're now in the summer months. We've heard, 3 of my sermons, so we have a sense. I don't want to wear you all out every week with a 12 to 15-minute sermon. So I thought it might be nice for you to give a sermon. And one of the topics, but we don't have to stick to this topic necessarily, is what has these last years meant to you relative to COVID? I know that many people have suffered terribly. Close to 600,000 lives in the United States alone have been lost. I know families that couldn't visit loved ones, particularly their parents, if you had elderly parents, you couldn't go and visit them. I know rabbis who performed funerals online, and I'm thinking, well, how hard it must have been for the rabbis to do that, or how much more painful it must have been for families. This congregation has gone through a very difficult period relative to COVID. We're grateful for the COVID committee, we're grateful for the leadership that's been demonstrated in trying to keep us all safe and yet keep us together as a community. I've said enough. I'd like to hear from you. What has this last year, a year and a half, been like for you? What has it meant to you in terms of any stories that you might like to share? We can go closer sometimes in sharing things that we didn't know about. Howard, please, thank you for starting.
The toughest thing I have ever done in my life was to drop my wife off at the hospital, undergo some very serious diverticulitis surgery. I couldn't see her, I could barely talk to her and to walk out of there after I dropped her off was to come here.
So this was a sanctuary for you. How difficult that must have been, because I know the love that you have for each other, and to.
I'm going to suggest that maybe we use the microphone when we're talking here, because I couldn't hear Howard back there. So.
We can use this one. We can use this one, Rabbi.
Can we use that one?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, you got it muted, but I'll turn it off. There we go. You can pass that one around.
The most difficult thing I've done in my life was to drop my wife off. Did you hear, Barry?
Put a little closer to your mouth, please, Howard.
The most difficult thing in my life was to take my wife to the hospital and have to drop her off to undergo very serious diverticulitis surgery. I couldn't see her, I couldn't get, all I knew is I heard from the doctor, but it was extremely difficult, and when I left the hospital, I came here to feel better.
If you can maybe stand and face that, might be easier for people.
The biggest thing I took away from this time was to learn the difference between, to make a choice between appreciation and aggravation. When you're in a confined area and you're not allowed to go anywhere, the person that you're confined with, you have to make that choice. And thank God I made the choice of appreciation. And I've learned a lot more about Callie than I ever knew in our 36 years of marriage. And most of it was just wonderful. So I hope that we continue on with being gracious to one another and appreciating one another in all different types of ways. Would anybody else?
Just so you know, I was the aggravation. Here was the appreciation.
Others, please.
Yeah, I'll say something. I think what I got out of here, that changes are good. We have changed, we had to change. Normally we don't like to change, we want to stay the same. And this year showed me that we could change and we could do better. So I feel so good because I'm the old fashioned, I don't like to change anything, I want to keep everything the same. But it was tough, but and then we can all change. I see that people change. So that's, to me, is a very good thing.
You all are not off the hook.
No.
It'll find its way back there, I hope.
Well, taking on this a little bit, I was thinking deeply about our confinement, because I'm not a confined area person. So it was very difficult for me. But I also felt like this huge global pandemic taught each person that if you have an immunocompromised person in your life, stop. If you sneeze, if you feel funny, if you're not right, don't go. Because how many times have people come to me with an allergy and leave with me having bubonic plague? So you think about now, today, that each one of us could carry something that could make an immunocompromised person very ill, and we don't think about it often, and now it's in the utmost part of our minds that we keep, we're the guardians of each other's health, in a way, and I never thought about that. I thought about it a lot, but I don't think the world thought about it because they didn't have to live in it. But now they kind of get a little glimmer of that more than people who didn't have that option. And that's all.
I guess it's running down the line. I don't want to go negative, so I'll do a little negative or positive. So I lost my mom during COVID, so this was very hard. She was out in California, and she was in advanced stages of leukemia, and I couldn't go see her. And so we had the funeral by Zoom, and that was very hard. And I did the eulogy by Zoom, and that was even harder. But I knew this was going to happen this way because I'm immunocompromised, and there was no way that I could travel because my doctor told me that if I caught it, I would be, in the funeral. So I decided, and she passed away in August. I just finished saying probably 40 days. I decided the May before she passed, and we knew it was getting close, that I would spend every single day with her by telephone. And if she could only talk 2 minutes, then we talked 2 minutes. And if she could talk for an hour, we talked for an hour. And we spent the most incredible times on the phone together. Sometimes she would reminisce, and sometimes we would laugh so hard it hurt, and sometimes we would cry so hard it hurt. So we learned a lot more about each other, and it was a really interesting time because we had an interesting history even before that. So I'm glad that I had that opportunity. And shortly after that, I had the opportunity to see a wedding by Zoom, and it was a beautiful event. So I think technology came to us in a really different way. And, I feel really happy about that because I think we can use technology in a lot of ways now in synagogue that we never considered before. And I think we can continue that. So I think it's great.
Yes.
So that's what I think. And? No, okay. Not girls.
I think Zoom and computers saved our lives. It was really nice to be able to contact our kids in California and Oregon. And it was wonderful. We shared so many
So the reason that she was on all these things so much, after 100 and, no, not that long, 53 years, 53 years, I don't think we've ever been together as much as we were during that time. And this is a real gem. That's just what with me. And I appreciate it.
For some of us, our lives were just impacted by work. They chased us out of the shipyard and sent us home to work there. And actually, I turned that around because one of the days I volunteered at the food pantry, which normally I would work on a Wednesday evening to pack it up, but on Tuesday to do the delivery, and it gave me I was able to work as long as I could, which was like 4 hours, which normally is spent at work. We had to get 8 hours in a 24-hour period, so it made it a whole lot easier. Just like yourself, I never spent so much time with my wife. We've been married coming up on 37 years. And at first it was awkward because she's been a stay-at-home mom since our youngest graduated from college in 2008. So it was really awkward. We have 3 indoor cats, and they're like our children, and here I was taking up the living room with this, aircraft carrier desk with 2 monitors and a desktop computer, and it was an interesting time. But otherwise, it was pretty much our lifestyle didn't really change a whole lot, except we got to know each other a lot, and it was wonderful.
Well, I can never pass up a moment. What I want to say is that this is the most unusual time in my life. And I tell the kids, grandkids, and everybody else, remember this, because we'll be talking about this long after we walk. And I think the most beautiful thing, two things that just come to mind right now is I didn't know much about Amy before this meeting. Hey, she was always the strong one, and this pandemic just gave her a big chicken. And I'll tell you that, I never did this.
The mic next.
I didn't know that I was going to be.
She gets the mic next.
Well, that's why I'm doing it. If she doesn't get me, but at any rate, she's the best thing that ever happened to me, and I appreciate it more than anything. Because she protects, I don't think I really know how honest working with everything else. But she's a good lady. And number 2, that I think the best thing that came out of this pandemic was Rabbi Flores. I really do. I mean, this is a situation here because we have been here every Friday night since we came to town, Maggie and Patty. And I want to tell you, I have been here through maybe 6 or 7 rabbis in my lifetime. And I don't remember anyone like you, and it's a real honor to have you here. I think this just saved the day in this town too, because you're so calm and you're peaceful and you talk. If you've got anything on your mind, you'd rather listen to you than anybody else. And I appreciate that. Thank you. And we're going to get through this thing, and don't tell me when you're home.
First of all, I have to thank Mom and Christopher.
Yes.
Services via Zoom, which I am not IT literate. Oh, okay. Anyway, we learned to appreciate Friday night services because y'all were here in the sanctuary. even at a distance, there was a sense of family within this congregation. And I think all of us, even participating in services with the pajamas on, and the waist down, and a blouse on top, we celebrated Shabbat. And Howard, I know how you feel, because our daughter also had open heart surgery on my birthday and was dropped off at the door alone until she came home. So it's not easy to have somebody in the hospital without a caregiver and an advocate. But I am thankful for everybody. And everybody who has just put forth 200% effort to make this temple still remain strong. And I love Jack. It just took a little while to get him convinced that it was not, that it was a pandemic and he had to live by the rules.
Everyone, I'm happy to continue this. I'm also conscious of the time, and I don't want to hold people here too late. Again, when we finish this, we have anywhere from 10 to no more than 15 minutes after we complete this section. My goal was to maybe stop at 7:30, but I see people may want to continue. I'm not a decision maker, as my wife will she's laughing. I'm a process kind of guy. You know, you want to continue this, or we can do this, whatever you prefer. Me, I'm a synagogue junkie. I'm a temple junkie. So for me, I'm very comfortable here. I can stay here. But how do you all feel? Do you want to continue, or should we continue with the service and do this at a different time? What's that? Service.
Everyone back to
You
what we
got
said.
the microphones. I'm going to let you have your.
I'll be quick.
Please. No, don't be quick on my account, please.
I lost my job in COVID, and everyone I knew also lost their jobs, all within the same hour. I lived in Washington, D.C. at the time, and the one thing that I learned from the pandemic is that time is valuable. And I never, to have no time to then having all the time in the world, it really taught me to be much more self-reflective and to be more conscientious of myself and others, which I thought was really important, or I now value more than I did in the past. So that's all I got.
I'm just bringing the mic back. I probably should say it's the newlyweds here, 25 years. We got to reflect on our future, which we never really have done before. Like, what happens after our careers? We're talking about it.
Nancy would like to say one thing.
I don't need the
Oh,
mic.
please.
I just wanted to say that I think Jack Freeland is precious.
Jack Freeland is precious. Yes, he is.
You're cute, but
We love Jack.
Yeah. I'm making all the people in Central dizzy. Apologies.
Well, this is somewhat of a difficult thing to do when so many people show up. So, usually, when we would do this on Shabbat at my previous congregation, we would have about 25, maybe 30 people. And so I apologize to those sitting in the back. We'll try to get to you at a later time. But I really appreciated everyone's stories that I heard. Jack, just as you may feel towards me, it's the same that I feel towards you and Amy and everyone. I feel really blessed to be part of this congregation. So I'll end with my little story. We were quarantined. We were strictly in quarantine. We followed CDC guidelines to the max, to the hilt. And so I was in school, taking classes online, and you have time, so you start kind of thinking, gee, I'd like to go, and I wonder what's out there as far as the congregation is concerned. So of course, thank goodness for the internet, I found your congregation, and I waited a couple of months, and I'm thinking, oh, the stuff materials look good, and it's still open. Maybe I'll send my resume there and just see what'll happen. Well, you all know the outcome. I've told the story so many times, but some people, the first time I think we actually went out was when we got on a plane, fully masked, to come here to look at homes. People said, you're going to take a position sight unseen, because we already signed the contract, you already approved the contract. And we felt so good from everything that we had seen online, from the beautiful services to your commitment to prayer, your history, everything that if you could function so beautifully during the pandemic with all that you had been through, and continue in such a positive way. I felt really blessed to be chosen as your next rabbi. It was really a no-brainer. And I say this to many people. I can't tell you, there's more than a few people that have come up to me in leadership positions and have said, Rabbi, all we want is for you to be happy. Rabbis don't hear that very often. That's not language, so you really treasure those. And those are really heartfelt comments. And actually, the reverse is true as well. All I want is for you to be happy, to feel fulfilled, to learn Torah, to be a sacred community to each other, to really enhance what you already have, which is something really quite beautiful and quite precious. So thank you for sharing those stories. They mean so much to me. They really do. And I can attest on the other side that having somebody there when you're going through open heart surgery or serious surgery is as important as getting all the medicine and all the nursing care that you can imagine. So I can only imagine how painful it must have been for those who were not able to be at their beloved sides. So, Chazak, Chazak, V'nit Chazek, we'll go forward together with strength. Let us continue now our service with the Misha Berach, the prayer for healing, on page 34. Our prayer for healing this month includes Paul Bradley, Susie Bruce, Alan Paul, Robin Mayer, Charmaine Moser, and Mark Siegel. I'll begin with the people on Zoom, and unmute yourself and say and share with us the names of those in need of healing.
Jennifer Sundberg and Jim Longino.
Thank you, Anne.
And Rafi Green, my great-grandson.
Thank you.
Robert Davis, Matthew McCormick.
No, please go. Is there anyone else on Zoom? I'll now turn to the congregation, and as your eyes meet mine, just say the name of those in need of healing. Alex Glass, Gail Carson. Let us turn now to the Laning on page 20. Please rise. That's on, excuse me, that's on page 35 and 36. Please rise. This week we observed the art sites of Paul Brown, Lilith May Gold, Jacob Reese, Lazarus Schwartz, Ruby Stern, Joseph B. Miller, Solomon E. Cherniak, Sidney Rossner. Is there anyone observing a yard site or saying Kaddish for someone who they wish to remember? We'll begin with the people on Zoom. You're unmuted, so.
Paul Brown.
In solemn testimony to that unbroken faith which links generations one to another, let those who mourn now rise and join in the recitation of the Kaddish, Kaddish for mourners and those observing yard site, those whose tradition it is to join in its recitation, page 43. Yikadal. v'yitkadosh shmei Rabbah, v'yalma divrachi lutei, v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yomechon, uv'chaye dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'lizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam u'le'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitala v'yitalal shemei d'kudsha b'richu ve'ela min ho birchata v'shirata tushbachata v'nechamata ta'amiran v'yalma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom ben bromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May God who establishes peace unto the heavens grant peace and comfort in the hearts of all who mourn, and let us say, Amen. You may be seated. This past week, we celebrated the birthdays of Caitlin Bergman, Rachel Borak, Jay Ross, Stephen Weinstein, David Zimmerman, James Perry, Maud Patterson, David Schulman, Eli William Franco, and today is the birthday of Ed Blassingame. The announcements, basically, if you look at the high notes, they haven't really changed. Services next Friday at 6:15. Please note, and particularly for the people on Zoom, that come the 1st of August, we will return to the Mishkan Tefillah, the standard Reform prayer book for services. A discounted Shabbat Mishkan Tefillah is available through the bookstore. I understand you have some copies there. And of course, you can go online. You can download it on Kindle, if that's your preferred, or I believe there's PDF. If you go online, it's a little complicated, but you can actually do it online for free. But you won't have it as you would if you were able to download it. Are there any other announcements? We're going to conclude our service, of course, with the Kiddush. Please rise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu, v'shabbat kadsho b'yahava uvratzon hinchilanu, zikaron ma'aseh v'leishi, kihu yom tefilah v'migrei kodesh, Zecher Tziat Mitzrayim, Kivanu v'charta, Yotanu kidashta, Mikol ha'amim, V'shabbat yotzecha, V'yava uv'ratzon, There's nothing like Manischewitz. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. May God bless you and may God guard you. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka. May God shine God's countenance unto you and be gracious unto you. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May God lift up God's presence unto you and grant you peace and wholeness of life. And let us all say, Amen. Shabbat shalom.
We forgot that Christopher got that great job, so we need to
Thank you.
But to quell all rumors, he is going to stay on as our music director. So no fears.
Have no fear.
He certainly calmed my anxiety. I stopped taking anxiety medication. We had a wonderful discussion, and he's going to continue here for as long as he's able. Certainly.
Let's do the piano. Thank you. Thank you, Gal. Thank you.
I apologize.
Oh, it's okay. The service is going on for a while. We'll just save it for next week. Yeah.